Welcome to Built to Last, the podcast where entrepreneurs share real stories about the triumphs and challenges of building enduring success. Hosted by Colby Jardine and Levi Lawrence.
Well, welcome, Stephen. I'm really excited about this conversation. For those who probably just heard it in the intro, but we have the Built to Last podcast where we're trying to have like the complicated discussions around entrepreneurship, business leadership, but also around some of the personal side, especially those leaders who end up, not necessarily separating the two, and how do you focus and build yourself as well as a business. So I've known Stephen for a long time, and we've had some interesting conversations, and Colby and Stephen have just met and are pretty much blood brothers after about 35 minutes of conversation. And so now I had to stop them so that we would continue the conversation they were jumping into and have it as part of this kind of lived experience or shared experience. So as per our usual, we don't really want to read the bio. People can Google you, we'll have show notes, but I'd love to just pass it off to you, Stephen, to just introduce yourself a little bit about, if I was asked the question, what's your business and who are you, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Levi. Listen, I think of myself, lately it's funny, I think of myself differently, honestly, because I think of myself now as a Canadian. It's weird. I've never thought of myself first that way before, but I really do right now. It's just, I always have underlying, but I'm thinking of myself as a Canadian. So I was born in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I have a very eclectic background, which we may or may not cover today. I am an entrepreneur. I like to think of myself as a solutionist. I started a business about 12 years ago. I opened up a brewery in Fredericton. I am a father, a husband, a son, a brother, a friend, and I like the outdoors, and I like to be very physically active. I think that's a good place to start.
It's comprehensive, yeah. Anywhere you want to go first, Colby? You're jonesing on a few of them, I know.
Yeah, I'm trying to pace myself here. I'm curious. I'm curious about how old is the brewery, and what kind of took you into those first steps? Was this like a homebrew hobby turned into the what it is today? How does that story come about?
Totally, it is. So we started, as a commercial brewery about 12 years ago. It depends on, we opened up in this larger location about a little over 10 years ago. I was a hobby brewer for probably over 15 years before I started GrimRoss. And it's interesting. So I was looking for a change at the time when I started GrimRoss. I was working for government. Well, I had been working for Service New Brunswick, which is a Crown Corporation. When I started GrimRoss, I was actually on secondment to NB Power, which is another Crown Corporation. And this is not a slight to any civil servants out there. My wife is a civil servant, and I have the greatest, deepest respect for those hard-working civil servants. Honest. But I remember many, many years ago when I was working for a company that my father owned, and a bit of a mentor, the guy that was sort of my boss, Maynard Shore, he had talked about a salesperson that they had, and she had left them. She was wonderful, by the way, and I was doing that job. So they really liked her, and I was doing that job then. And they were talking about her going to work for the province, and they said, well, I think they were speculating as to whether or not she'd go back into the private sector, and Maynard said, well, look, she's got 7 years, and that's the time limit. Once you're in there any longer than 7 years, you're ruined. And so I think I was coming up on 5 years, and I had that funny idea in the back of my head. Gee, I don't want to become permanently a civil servant. Again, not that that's bad, but I identified as an entrepreneur. And so I decided to look around at things to do. I was pretty good at making beer. I was a bit of a geek. So it was more of a craft and a science. I really, really enjoyed, all the comprehensive aspects of being a brewer. And I brought it to my wife, and she said, gee, that's one of the better ideas you've had. So I decided to jump in. And that's how I started GrimRoss.
Wow.
But
I
yeah,
love the beer, by the way.
thank you.
I'm not a huge drinker, but when I do drink, I like it to be, good quality stuff, and GrimRoss has definitely been part of that over the
You know,
past 15
Here,
years.
here
I
I'm
should
just doing
say,
the math because my wife has been in government for 9 years. I'm like,
uh-oh.
oh.
Um, one of the things that sort of struck me, so I said I had been brewing for almost 15 years. So here's an important part of the equation. All right. So way back in the 90s, I had started a business with my wife called Stedex Corporation. And that business was an IT company, an IT business. And most of what we did was development. So we basically, this was way back when this was a thing. So way back when, enabling web-enabled databases was actually technically advanced a little bit, right? Today it's obviously not, but back then it was advanced. I was not a programmer, but I was more of a salesperson, and I knew enough about technology that I could speak to the programmers, and I was enough of a business person that I could speak to the business side, and I could sort of interpret the need and I could speak the language of both to
he
help.
he might have just described our business.
You just described their
Well,
business.
okay. So anyway, so I was able to do that, but when when business ebbed and flowed, I couldn't jump in and pick up the slack because I couldn't do the programming. And so we decided to shut the business down. We didn't have to, but we decided to do that. And I said to myself that I'll never do a business again that I can't do pretty much everything. And so for a long time, after starting up GrimRoss, I did everything. I mean, everything from designing the recipes to making the beer to packaging the beer to distributing the beer to selling the beer, cleaning the toilets. I did everything. So, and that's kind of something that I've stuck with since then, is that I want to make sure that I'm never beholden to anybody, that I can always do everything for not just the reason that it's practical that I can do it if I need to, but also when you're interacting with people that then work for you, it's important that you really deeply understand what it is. Not because you think that they might try to pull one over on you, but that may have happened before, but because you need to help to mentor them and to communicate on a different level with them. So I find it to be very useful.
And we'll chat about this in a bit, but you're now you have, from what I see as an outside perspective, the freedom to pursue and think on other topics than the brewery business, which is still going. When it was meaningful delegation of core work in the company, of operations or sales or brand, was that something that happened to you, or did you make an intentional decision and kind of like, I'm now ready, or I'm going to take that step? How did or is that a moment that you can remember in time, or did it just kind of all flow?
In hindsight, I can see the picture, but when I started, I couldn't see it as it was happening. Literally, I was in the back and Don was in the front, and we were
Don, who has a government job full time.
Don, who has a government job full time, and then so we needed people to work in the tap room first, and then so we hired part-time people for that, and then we needed somebody that could hire the people but also coordinate the people. So we needed a supervisor, then a manager, then we needed other brewers because I was too busy. Then we needed junior people for packaging and doing labor work, and then so just gradually over time as the business grew. I shouldn't say gradually. It all happened very quickly. We were growing in triple digits, not double digits, and so the growth was kind of silly. Like it was. I never would have budgeted for that kind of growth ever. And as a matter of fact, my fear was always that I'd never be able to grow fast enough, or that we would never be able to sell enough beer. And from day one, we could never keep up. And so for the longest time, there was never a need even to think about a salesperson. Why would I do that? Or marketing, why would I do that? That would be silly. I can't keep up today. Why would I increase the demand that I can't yet meet? So we just gradually grew over time as we needed bodies, and then all of a sudden, it seemed one day there needed to be some coordination with schedules and vacations and time off and, production management and, inventory management. All of a sudden, things became bigger and a little bit more complex, and we needed to have people to pay attention to that. And that largely landed on my desk. Dawn was always the financial manager. She's got a background in accounting, so she still actually kind of leads that. We have a bookkeeper, but she still kind of, leads that side of things.
She probably wouldn't want it any other way.
No, that's right. She does the same thing at home. And so anyway, so it just evolved over time. And, honestly, I'd say that's the hardest part of a business that I never realized I had smaller businesses, but once you get over 20 people, that's really the hard part, I think, in my experience of a business is managing the people, resourcing the people, and motivating and leading the people. And it's the hardest part of the business.
It's a selfish question for us because we do our own strategic planning and our own goals, and we're a different industry. We're not 20 people, but we're at that line for our industry where a pillar of our strategic plan is to replace ourselves, or at least make the business less dependent upon us. And there's 3 owners in our company, and it's the first time I've gone about it trying to plan forward for it. Where my first business, similar to yours, was I was on the line and kind of kept up with the pace of it and adapted on a day to day. But now it's been interesting on how do you approach it, because right now we're making plans for we can't quite afford that step, that needed piece that will make us completely independent. And so we're trying to roadmap it a little bit and have our goals adjusted to it. And it's just, I'm hoping someday to find some people who did that the first time, but I've never met them.
And then what are the nuances that we're clearly missing in this equation? It's the other question.
Yeah.
I find that, so you raise a really good point. I have been trying to build the business so I can, focus on other things, spend time doing things, day to day that I choose, that, I'm not obligated to do. And then so I get the business to a point where, okay, I've put in place these people and I can step back, and then you sort of step further away, and then, well, no, you got to go back into it, and then you think you got it figured out and you back away a bit. No, I got to get back into it. So one of the things that really surprises me, I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, but one of the things that becomes really evident is that a founder owner that's in the business operating, there's a stickiness that it's hard to get away from, not because you're necessarily afraid to do that, but when you're there, the people around you still defer so much to you. And so you almost have to make a big break, I think. I don't know how to do it yet. And to be honest, I haven't completely done it. I'm still here. And so I'm working on it still. It's a work in progress. But that's the hard thing, is to get to a point where you've got a group of people that feel completely independent to be able to run all of the day-to-day activities.
Yeah. My understanding is this is even more true for the technician entrepreneur, the entrepreneur who founded a business. He could do everything or started doing everything. It's not like if I bought a brewery and didn't brew, it'd be kind of a different thing, I think, but maybe not.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah.
We chatted with Jean-Francois a little bit about this transition stuff. So I think an intro to Jean-Francois and Stephen might be in order, just to have that conversation. He's done that specific transition quite a few times, and has some pretty interesting thoughts around it.
Well, and now he's got to a point where he has a portfolio of companies, and so the act of managing multiple companies is the business, and so it's just kind of a wild flip on your head. It's fascinating.
And so that excites me. A portfolio. Yeah. You see, I have a new idea pretty much every day, and so I have to park ideas constantly.
Yeah.
So before I ask the question of what are the things you're doing now, I'd love to start with, what was your first business affair? I have to assume that you hit a point a few years in, you're like, oh, I think I could do a little bit of something else. What was your first distraction business? Have you ever heard the business affair? It's the side piece. I have this main business, but I have an idea. I'm just going to go
Oh,
try a little bit?
God, Levi, I don't know how. So what was the first one that I had?
Yeah,
What was the first
because you
major?
did everything and you started delegating, it started working. What was the first thing that you decided to try?
Um, I think, oh, geez, I don't even know if I could, I mean, I guess I never really jumped into very many things full. I mean, we might, there's one sort of big one that I'm working on today. There's a whole bunch of things that I still might do, so I don't want to really talk about them right now.
Mm-hmm.
One that I've done that I'm still doing, and so GrimRoss, we, how do I say this without, I don't want to be condescending. I mean, GrimRoss really puts a lot of, we put our money where our mouth is in terms of quality management.
Yeah,
Probably,
more than I've seen in any brewery, especially at a craft level,
and I don't
for
think it's
sure.
being boastful to say we do. I think we really do. We really have invested a fair amount of money, time, and effort. You know, we built a laboratory. You know, we've got some pretty
Yeah.
sophisticated equipment. You know, we were doing COVID testing at our lab, you
Mm-hmm.
know, when COVID hit, and until the government shut us down, we had businesses, we had large industry, like the biggest, largest industries in New Brunswick calling us to say, hey, look, the government's not fast enough. We want somebody to do our COVID testing. Can you do it for us, please? And so we had contracts lined up, and then the government shut us down. So, but that all that to say is that we got a pretty decent lab, and so
Mm-hmm.
we do lab testing not just for ourselves, but that's why we started it. But we do lab testing for other breweries,
Mm-hmm.
other entities, and not just breweries, but so that's and I still, you know, if I could have the time and I thought that I want to do it, that's still something I think we could take quite a way. I think we could go far with that. Now I've got some other things that I want to do, so I don't think I will. But it's a distraction. It's an affair, I guess. Yeah.
Do you measure opportunities on potential impact or profitability? When I Google your name these days, I think sustainability comes up more often than Grimross, and I just like, is that how you measure things now? Like, where's because you could do, you could do a lot of different things. How do you make those decisions now?
I think that 10 or 15 years ago, totally it would have been on return on investments. It would have been on, you know, growth trajectory. It would have been on, you know, total available market. It would have been those types of things, right? Today, so I'm 61 now. I'll be 62 this summer, and it's totally changed. Now I
Hmm.
want to have I want a profitable, you know, impactful, successful business, but I really flipped it. Now it's all about, you know, solutions that it will really truly help humanity. That sounds kind of silly to say
Hmm.
and cliche to say, but you know what? We need. I think that the world more than ever needs more people. And I say this as a joke that you know. So entrepreneurship is about finding solutions to problems. Yes, of course, for everybody, right? But even somebody might say, well, look, we need that 39th flavor of ice cream. And so, you know, because I think there's a niche for that. There's a niche for that lobster shell, you
Yeah.
know, flavor of ice
There's
cream.
small pain and big pain to solve.
Right. And then, so that, yes, that's solving a problem, but that's not the kind of problem I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about real
Hmm.
problems,
Hmm.
like problems that you know, the people have, the problems that the earth has, problems that our environment has, like real problems that are going to make a difference for the long-term impact of humanity
Hmm.
on this planet. So that's, yeah, that's, it
Was
sounds,
there a
yes, I
moment in time or realization, or did that just happen gradually? That shift.
think it happened gradually.
Hmm.
Um,
No single book or author or happening that's kind of
well,
catalyzed.
so that's something. So about 2.5 to 3 years ago, so when I started Grim, so let me see, how do I say this? So before GrimRoss, I was, I took sports and athleticism and fitness very serious. My background's in kinesiology, and I've always thought, you know, so sports and physical activity and fitness and wellness and health, our bodies has always been something that's important to me. And I was in quite good shape, you know, 15 years ago. And then when I started Grimross, you know, I was working in a full time job, at NB Power at the time, and I was starting a business. And anybody that started a business knows that even starting a business is more than a full-time job. So I was doing almost 3 jobs. So I was working all the time. Like I'd be up at 5 a.m. and I'd be getting home at midnight, like every day. And so I got into a habit of that's it. My fitness routine changed, my sleep patterns changed, everything changed. And then for the next 10 years, I just got progressively less fit. I gained weight. I was eating too much and not well. I wasn't sleeping properly. I was drinking more than I should. Everything was just, and I woke up, towards the end of COVID, and I had COVID. I got COVID, and it kicked me in the butt really hard. Now, it could have just been because that's COVID, but I thought to myself, you know what? My body is not in good shape right now to fight this. And so I had sort of a forced downtime. I went to the family cottage down at Grand Lake, and I was by myself, and I reflected, and I said, that's it. I'm not going to follow this path because I'm driving myself into the ground. And so that was a bit of an epiphany. And I started doing all kinds of things. I started journaling. I started meditating. I started reading a lot. A lot of philosophy. A lot of listen. I'm reading a book right now. It's written by a physicist. It's called Irreducible, and it's about quantum mechanics. So I've got an incredibly diverse, eclectic, set of interests. So I think it's me paying attention to, getting myself, my body, and my mind into a better place. And so I believe a lot in continuous learning.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I'll put in the show notes if you have any super remedies to stay young. Like the fact that you don't even have gray hair.
I have like 3 or 4 right here.
I found one right there the other day.
Yes, but there's 30 years between you.
Well, I gotta go on the Stephen Dixon protocol here next week.
Yeah. So you still have GrimRoss Brewing. Yeah. And from outside perspective, things to be going really well. Like it's amazing for me because I was very closely associated in the beer and beverage industry for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think back, I was like, oh yeah, 15 years ago, that just wasn't a thing really. There was a couple people in market and, bars sold Guinness and Harp and that's all they did. And so like, it's still relatively young. But you're still, from everything I can see, that's still going well. And it's an impressive part of the market. What are the problems you're tackling? The big problems, not little p, but big P. What are the problems you're tackling, and are you doing that with GrimRoss or with other company, or both?
So when you say you're not you're talking big picture,
Well, big picture, I guess, is like because I love your turn to like solving the big complex problems.
Yeah.
Are you using your current tool of GrimRoss in meaningful ways to do that, or have you decided to fund new opportunities to better address it? Just like what was your thought process on that?
So a little bit of both. So with GrimRoss, the market, you're right, 15 years ago. By the way, I do this as much as I can to give credit to somebody that really helped me a lot, was Sean Dunbar. By the way, Sean was not just a leader in the craft sector in craft beer in New Brunswick. He was a leader in Canada, mm-hmm. right? So he was one of the first in the entire country, not just in the province. Mm-hmm. So kudos to Sean. And Sean, by the way, has given back so many times to so many people. Just a testament to his character. And so when we started, we were brewery number 4, I think, in the province. And now there's like 64. I think there's been more. And so the market has changed dramatically. The world has changed. Like I said, we 1 year charted 700% growth. It's ridiculous. And so...
yeah, that sounds like a really rough year, actually. For those who kind of understand it, it sounds rough.
Really difficult. It's not fun, to be honest.
No.
What was it? What percent?
700
growth 1 year.
Oh, what?
I know. Yeah. We started very small, so okay. But it was stupid. And by the way, that's very hard to manage. It's not easy to manage that. Yeah,
Hard.
yeah. And so we've gone through a lot of change, so we've had really, great success, and we're very happy. We're very proud of our attention to quality and consistency. Um, and as we were growing, um, we started to get interest from outside of New Brunswick, and we started to export. We were selling in Alberta and Manitoba, and we were starting to sell beyond that. We invested in our business quite heavily to increase the capacity to. We had decided that we strategically, our business, that was going to be our growth path. Our growth path was going to be to go across the country. Now that means a lot of things. It means increased complexity and logistics and decreased margins, but we had thought through that, and we were going to go and do that. And so we invested in capacity to do that. We felt that our product was good product, that we could do that. We were getting good traction out there, and so we invested in equipment here, and then literally as we were constructing the expansion and installing the new equipment that came from Italy, COVID hit. Right when we had to go through massive, hoops, jump through massive hoops to do the installation, to bring the guys in from Italy. It was a nightmare. And then so what happened is that, good and bad, the market changed in craft beer. People became very hyper local because everybody was very focused on supporting their local businesses, and that was a good thing. And so we benefited from that, but we also suffered from that because as we were looking to go across Canada, people were really, retrenching and supporting the guy down the street, not the guy down on the other side of the country. So that business went away overnight, and it really didn't come back the same way. And so that created something for us to change our business a lot. So we're focusing more on local business. We're focusing more on our local tap room and interacting with people and that sort of thing. But you talk about, so there's been a lot of interesting problems to solve. And when people talk about problems being a problem, that's life. I mean, so if, so some of the Stoic philosophy that I've read, thought, Shed, if you expect to wake up every morning and have everything go according to plan, the traffic's going to be right, the weather's going to be sunny, and everybody's going to be cheerful when you walk in, and you're not going to get sick, and if you expect every day to be perfect, you're not going to be happy. But if you get up in the morning and you expect that, hey, you know what? There's going to be all kinds of things that I have to fix today, and that's going to be fun. Think of it like a game, a video game, any kind of game. Any kind of game you engage in, typically you're trying to overcome a challenge, right? So that's the best way to look at life.
Agreed.
So move forward to one of the problems that we had as a business that was not in line with my philosophy was, we're an energy intensive business and we have waste. More waste in some businesses, less than others, but we have waste. And so I was focusing on how we could be more sustainable as a citizen and as a business. And we looked at, so one of the things that we did that not everybody does is we really went all in on spunding. So spunding is a form of carbonation. You're carbonating your beer. So when beer is fermenting, it's expiring CO2. So if you've ever been a home brewer or if you've been to a brewery, you notice there's bubbling water with a hose going in it. That's the CO2 bubbling out, and so that's a greenhouse gas, right? And so what we did is if you put a valve, a pressure valve on that blow off tube, instead of it blowing off, it stays in the beer. And instead of having your beer produced and then putting CO2 into it, because you can buy the CO2, you have a great big CO2 tank outside, and then you inject the CO2 into the beer, we naturally carbonate our beer. So we use the CO2 as it's being produced in the beer to carbonate itself. So that's just an example of, there's all kinds of things you can do to solve problems and be a solutionist. So energy recovery, recycle, there's all kinds of different things. One of the things that I had an issue with was we were sending our spent grain, that's the leftover grain after we finished extracting the sugar from it to make beer, we were sending it to a cattle farmer. You know, I'm a pescatarian. I eat fish and plants. That's it. And so, you know, one of the many reasons. There's more than one reason, but one of the reasons why I don't eat red meat is because there is some, you know, there's some environmental concerns. There's other concerns as well, but environmental is one of them. Cows produce a fair amount of CO2 and methane, and so you know, look, the guy that owns the farm is a good friend of mine. I grew up with him, and I love him, and he does great work. And by the way, in terms of farmers, he's one of the best. But it didn't jive perfectly with my values. And so I started looking at how I could be more sustainable in operating my business from our waste management. And so I was looking at biodigesters, I was looking at composting, and you're on Google and you're researching, right? And I discovered black soldier fly larvae, insects, bugs, maggots. And so I discovered that people were using them to, well, listen, they've been around a lot longer than we have in terms of, you know, the circular ecosystem. And so I discovered them, and the more I researched, the more I realized how amazing they were. And as I continued to dive into research, I thought, Jesus, this could solve our problem from a waste problem for GrimRoss, but this is a much bigger potential opportunity because not very many
and solution.
Starting to gain traction today. So when I started GrimRoss, I started the business in a small space in our basement, maybe 150 square feet, and then I expanded to maybe 500 square feet with picaroons, and then 4,000 feet. Anyway, so in this same room in our basement, it was no longer being used. I thought, I'm going to try to raise, maggots. I'm going to try to raise black soldier fly larvae.
I'm just visualizing the spousal conversation right now.
So I
love this so much.
Very patient wife. And so I went and got so we would compost our food. So I would take that food, and so I got some black soldier fly larvae. I just mail ordered them, and they got them in, and there they were in a container, and all maggots. And so I started the operation in my basement. And the first thing you learn when you do this is that if the feedstock for the larvae is too dry, they escape because it's too dry, right? And so these things are the size of maybe an almond, so they're pretty big. And this room was right beside our home office in the basement. And so my wife would holler to me, Stephen, get down here. There's maggots crawling across the floor, and they move pretty quick. So what happens is they find their way into little nooks and crannies where you can't see them, and then maybe a few weeks later, you walk downstairs, you open the door, and my wife screams because the room's full of black soldier flies, because they've pupated and they've emerged as flies. And they look like wasps, right? They're pretty big and they look like wasps. So anyway, so she called down. Anyway, the second thing you learn is that when the feedstock's too wet, they escape. Anyway, so you go through all these learning phases. So I learned. So I'm a very hands-on kind of person. I like to, do things that I say I'm going to do. So this is how I went through this.
Question.
So it worked.
What do you mean by escape? Like how do they get out of what they're in? Just walk me through that, because I'm picturing something in my head. And you said they're about the size of an almond. Mm-hmm. So the thing that the fly that they turn into is quite sizable.
Yeah.
Right.
About the size of a wasp, if you've ever seen.
Okay.
Or a hornet.
So what are they in, and how do they escape?
So when you have them when you're raising the larva, you've got them in a tote, plastic tote.
Yeah.
In this case, that's not what I would do. Commercially, you'd do something different, but in my home experiment, my little proof of concept, it was in a plastic tote. And I had different levels. I had like drainage, and so I had this sort of contraption made up so it wouldn't get too wet. And so what happens is that they crawl out. So there's just enough moisture on their bodies that they can sort of stick to the side, and they kind of wiggle. They just wiggle their way up, and they get out.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Continue.
Anyway, so that's it. So I mean, I've since then, that was now a few years ago. Since then, I've done a great deal of things. I've worked with RPC, and we've done a pilot facility. We built a pilot facility. We reared many generations of larvae there on the feedstock that we think we're going to feed them. I can't talk about who we're working with right now, but so that is something that I am continuing to pursue. And so
is this about
that.
reduction of waste, or like
So
what's the?
there's sort of a this is a multifold opportunity. So this is the ultimate in your circular economy, circular ecosystem. So over time, since the dawn of agriculture, 10 to 15,000 years ago, we have increasingly removed the natural from the system. Insects have always been a very important fundamental, foundation of this circular ecosystem that we live in. I mean, maggots. We all know that you see the dead animal on the side of the road, and why is it moving? Well, you go turn it over and you find out why it's moving. Rotten food. So maggots, basically are eating decaying materials, just like fungi and bacteria are. So it's a part of the process, and we've removed them. So we've removed insects and all kinds of fungi and bacteria from our systems, and it's created a lot of problems for us. So when I first started thinking about this, I was thinking, well, what could I do with this stuff? Well, I learned that there were people that were taking the larvae and they were euthanizing them. So think of larvae as very tiny livestock. All right. So I'm a farmer, and today, GrimRoss, I'm a farmer at GrimRoss because I'm rearing tiny single-celled organisms, right? And so if those single-celled organisms, yeast cells, are not really happy, they produce bad-tasting beer. So basically, those little yeast cells are eating the sugars, right, from the wort, and they're metabolizing that, and they're excreting compounds. So we often say that the yeast are farting CO2 and they're peeing, alcohol. Well, it's not just alcohol. They're excreting all kinds of compounds that contribute to the flavors of the beer. Where am I going with this? So, so I'm a farmer. So these larvae are livestock, and so you euthanize them, and then you process them. So you dry them. And you remove the fat. They're very high in very high quality protein. And you remove the fat, and those oils are also nutritious. And their frass, their poop, is a great fertilizer. And so my first thought in this business, my thinking has evolved, but my initial thinking was that, well, we've got some products here, so I could take care of this waste stream, and I could turn it into protein. And so there are markets for the protein in fish feed and pet food and poultry feed and pork feed and so on. And eventually humans do eat some proteins from crickets, for example. It's not uncommon. And then the frass is great fertilizers, and there's markets there. And so that was something that I thought was advantageous. And of course, one of the big benefits is that if we're so when I sell to a fish feed producer, let's say, I'm selling them on the notion of protein, and it's going to offset some less sustainable protein, which is fish meal, primarily, right? We're overfishing our oceans. Some of the methods that we extract the protein and fish meal from the oceans is drag netting. So we're destroying, the ocean bottom. You're in a cold climate, particularly, it takes hundreds of years for those cold corals to grow. So we're really raping and just destroying our oceans and getting fish meal. Well, the other big problem we're getting in getting protein is from soy meal. It's because we're cutting down forests to grow soy. So deforestation to grow soy is a pretty big problem. And so,
And
um,
most people don't account for that when they are making their choices at the
no,
grocery
no.
store.
And so these were what this is what I was thinking. But increasingly, as I go down the path and I sort of and I'm building this business, and I'm building business relationships, I'm thinking that at least half of the equation. So the value proposition is I'm creating sustainable feed, right, and fertilizer. But equal to that is the waste management solution, and
Yep.
scope 2, 3, and 4 emissions. Scope 4 emissions are emissions that you don't create in the first place because you're doing something else. And so large industrial, organic food producers have a lot of waste. And so our idea is we take that waste that would otherwise produce CO2 or methane, and we basically eliminate that because the larvae produce very, very, very minute amounts of greenhouse gases, almost none,
Yeah.
and we create a sustainable product. So now
Any
imagine,
type of product, like
pardon?
any type of organic food product. Is there any
Pretty much,
limitations to the
yeah.
type of?
The larvae
Wow.
will eat pretty much anything. So now I don't want to get into too much detail, but there are provinces that are having some big initiatives to divert organic waste away from landfills, and so we could do that. There are markets that have very big fish waste problems. Well, we could solve that. New York City used to send all of its human waste out into the ocean on barges and dump it in the ocean, but they obviously can't do that anymore. So what they've been doing for years is they've been putting it into containers on trains and shipping it across the country to municipalities to process that human waste.
Hmm.
Well, what's happening is that those cities now are reaching their capacity and they're no longer accepting it. So you've got many kilometers long, train, cars full of human waste with nowhere to go. And so the larvae will eat this as well. Now, obviously, you can't take that larva raised on human waste or other waste, feces, and then process it and feed that protein to a fish or a chicken that you're going to eat.
Hmm.
You can't do that. Um, but you can use those larvae for other things like biofuel and so on. You can certainly use the fertilizer. So I guess where I'm going with this is that the value proposition is pretty significant if you look at both sides of the coin. And um, so I guess I'm thinking about this business being a spin-off out of GrimRoss because it started from GrimRoss and it just started, well, look, how can I solve this problem? Well, then,
Hmm.
so just, and you sort of and the next thing you know, you have what might be a very significant business. Um,
Absolutely
yeah,
fascinating and exciting. Like it's
yeah,
just
Oh,
like
it's
big solutions to big problems is absolutely fascinating.
so this hits a little closer than maybe even Levi realizes with me because after my first business, I kind of found myself trying to find another one, and I started a cricket protein bar
oh,
um, called wait for it called Jump Bar, and it was like a
good.
great branding too. I'll send it to you. Um, but the reason I didn't go through with it was because the I had no way of guaranteeing unless I raised them myself and processed them myself that they wouldn't go do the exact same thing that I was doing. So there was two major locations, one in Ontario, one in Madagascar, same owners, and so I had a great recipe. It was a good product, and I just kind of didn't feel confidence from my last business experience that I would be able to scale this without worrying about them kind of taking over the same market.
Mhm.
But I had a fascination with crickets and
Hmm.
and all the stats of like protein and emissions and all that kind of stuff is something that I cared deeply about and was fascinated with. I couldn't seem to get past the aftertaste. There was an aftertaste that I was having a really hard time getting rid of. But I mean, that's probably a solvable issue.
Probably.
But pretty high protein, and
Yep.
um, yeah. Anyway, I was doing that, and then the second thing was I was going to work with this company in South Africa on doing a sustainable fish food product, and that was like a tilapia based,
Yeah.
vertical farming type situation. Because in my first business, I was working with phytoplankton, and we were going to start to grow the algae and turn that into pellets and all that kind of stuff. So I was pretty into this for a while, but I haven't really been down the research. I haven't had a conversation like this since then, and that was 8-9 years ago.
Well,
Um,
you were ahead of the curve.
Mm.
yeah, maybe it was too ahead for the moment because I went and did a presentation at my old high school in front of the whole school, and it was based around sustainability and things
Yeah.
like that. And I had these kids come up and try it. Found out they didn't have any shellfish allergies because apparently that's the only allergy you have to worry about with crickets. Found out they didn't have that, and I got them to taste it and told them what it was afterwards in front of hundreds of people, and it was quite a hilarious reaction.
Yeah.
But people's perception of that is they're very uncomfortable with it.
Yeah. So that'll be so that's why, our plan is that initially, it's to feed to animals, right?
Yeah,
Mm.
Now, with the future to feed to humans. Look, a lot of the people that are using cricket today in the human markets are typically it's a meal or a powder
yeah,
that goes into breads, muffins, and things like that,
Hmm.
yeah,
cookies, protein bars, and depending on the ratio of how much insect meal is in it, the flavors are more or less a thing.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, you could probably. I mean, I have not worked with crickets, but you could probably do something to overcome that aftertaste.
Yeah, yeah, it was fairly strong, and my poor parents. When I was going through that, I was using their kitchen to explore all this, and
Your parents, his wife, poor.
yeah,
There are still today. There are 2 billion people on the planet that regularly eat insects. As
right,
part of their diet. It's like and they don't, and it's not hidden in a flower. It's like the
yeah,
grasshoppers are this big, and they're and
totally,
so 2 billion people now. Today in North America, the ick factor is hard to overcome, but I think in the future we'll figure that out. Look, the
yeah,
bottom line is,
If it's also a lower cost, that's going to be like, I think food's only going up in price too. So
yeah. Well, look, the resources. Part of that's because of the resources needed, right?
yeah.
With insects, the resources are dramatically lower. The amount of space you need to raise them, the amount of water you need to raise them. Typically, what their diet is already a waste product, so it's very low cost, if any cost. And look, you're closing that sort of ecosystem. So
Hmm.
there's just so many good things about it. Um,
that
there will
was
always
kind of
be
my
right now. I mean, so you had a good concern about whether or not somebody could low barriers to entry. The barriers aren't that low, really. There are a lot of people that have tried to do this business and failed. There's some big companies right now in the world who have gone bankrupt. And typically, in my experience, there's some reasons that we understand why they've gone bankrupt. We think that we've got that figured out. Um, so we think that we've got some secret sauce that we'll be able to make it work.
my friend in my EO Bridge chapter group that I travel with. He owns a fascinating company. I feel like it's called Crop Solutions. They're out of Ontario. His name's Ishtiak. I'll make an intro for sure, but he's managing indoor farming with bugs. So he finds the right bug to optimize growing this without any use of chemicals or anything like that.
And what's the
Um,
purpose of the bug? Is it as a pest control?
um, what's that? Sorry.
What's the purpose of the bug? Like, what's the insect
Uh,
being used for?
it can serve many purposes,
Yeah,
but it might be just like creating the right environment for no diseases or anything like
right.
that
Yeah,
to
yeah.
to
Mhm.
um, he's got I'm pretty sure he's got some sort of doctorate in insects. But he's a fascinating person that I need to I need to learn a little bit more about what exactly his business is doing, but he's scaling quite quickly.
There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in entomology. That's the study of insects
There we go.
and genetics. So a lot of cool stuff happening there.
Yeah.
So a transferable question, because that's super fascinating, and like that's like the outcomes both potentially financially, but also like making real change and impact are really kind of the word I would use is probably distracting. We also talk about new and cool ideas on a very different scale. How do you, is it discipline or routine, or how do you make sure you keep your or do you keep your hand on the GrimRoss ship when you have some of this other exciting thing going on?
So yeah, I mean that has been the single biggest factor, the challenge, I guess. My father, who's also an entrepreneur, his advice to me has always, because he hears me talking about ideas all the time, and he's just constantly driving into me, Stephen, focus, focus. So his advice to me mostly has been one word, focus, because he knows I've got all these ideas. He actually thinks this is a good idea, and so it is the challenge. So I'm right now I'm going through that transition phase. I'm right now trying to have GrimRoss in a place that it can operate without my full attention. So I'm in that transition phase as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
That is what keeps me up at night. That's what I think about when I'm driving home after work. I think about how I'm going to navigate this phase of my career, this phase of my life. I don't know that I'll ever. I mean, people talk about work-life balance. I don't see it like that. I don't think about retirement at all. Like I really don't. I mean, I think that maybe what I think about is that I want to be able to be in more control of the hours of my days, and I want to be able to do what strikes me as interesting at any moment. And so that's kind of how I think. I've got a lot of interests. Fitness is a big interest. In the last 2 or 3 years, I've been reinvigorating back to my old days of staying in shape, and
So the journey you're currently in the middle of and have dabbled with, that whole transition of like being able to safely or trustedly take my eye off the ball in my business, that's the problem that our company was kind of designed to tackle. We don't always sell it as that, but that would be the one common element of every client we have ever, is that's why they're doing smaller things. Like, I want this CRM, or I want these processes document, or I want these improvements in the way we run. And we stopped saying like, so you can sell, so you can retire, unless that's very clear, because then we try to match language to their goals. But for the most part, it's around the word dependence and independence.
Yeah.
Create independence or lessen dependence is really kind of where we focus on. And so every step doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you don't have to do it.
Freedom.
And what are those mechanisms, or that internal knowledge base, or that intellectual property, or those systems in place? And I just to be clear, it's not about like, here's the big tool, or here's the AI. It's like a lot of this is checklists. Checklist is the most powerful process on earth. But it's just taking the time to think through it and understand what should be done and what's a role look like and what's a pro. So it feels so much less than you're changing the world on waste, but it is a fascinating challenge that we enjoy.
Well, no, but it's underpinning the whole infrastructure. I mean, without. So I guess I'm struggling now with, and here we are, interestingly, having this conversation, but I'm struggling with what it is that you guys help with.
Sure.
So maybe we should have a conversation offline. But yeah, I mean.
Well, we struggle with having that conversation, so that's.
Yeah, because like a lot of the times, an example of a question is like, what would have to be true for me to be able to check in with this business twice a week, and it still function, and like that being the goal rather than retirement. It's like, is it combination of upskilling the people that I have? Is it a new hire? Is it, new tools, new processes, whatever it might be?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
results in very tactical things. Like there's strategy and there's understanding the gaps, and you can have all the fancy words around it. But it does come out in very tactical things, which yeah, I'd love to chat through it, even your perspective, because when I hear you talk, the way you approach solutions, like I think I might have mentioned this, but if not, that it's really funny that you keep using the word. But like our core role in our company is called solutionists, and we call ourselves a solutions agency. And it's just this whole, like, we're not here to deliver a website, we're here to solve a problem.
Right, right.
And if a website happens to solve a problem in your organization, let's build a website. But nobody should just build a website for building a website's sake. Or introducing AI is a very clear one, because most companies probably aren't digitally mature enough to really reap any benefit.
Yeah.
So our goal is the solution to the problem, not any one of the particular things we deliver as a service.
Yeah.
Which makes it very complicated for us to understand, but like the language internal has been very validating and encouraging for our team. Like we're problem solvers. And solutionism and solutionist and solutions agency is all through everything. And then you just kept hammering that word. Oh, it's been a lot of fun.
Well, interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, and you know what? I started using this word after I read a book by Solitaire Townsend. And she's an author that wrote a book called The Solutionists. I recommend it if you're, because
Well, it sounds like we probably should read it.
you should read it. It's called The
Because
Solutionists.
people might infer we're using it as our branding anyway.
Solitaire Townsend is her name. And and the book, and she interviews a lot of very successful, entrepreneurs who have built their business around solving, real problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so, listen, I think that to me, it's astounding when people say, well, geez, I don't know what kind of business I should start, or, there's just nothing out there. There are so many problems in the world today, and problems need solutions, and solutions can be monetized. And so there's no end to problems to solve. And those are all businesses. And so, yeah, just open your eyes. There's just so many. And something that struck me as you were talking about, solutions and, business problems, is that I just had a discussion with my team yesterday, and we were talking about social media and marketing. And so so it came to a point where I just said, look, so the conversation was such that we were hitting it from the wrong side. And I said, look, what are we trying to achieve? What is our goal? So let's not talk about, a social media strategy based on, social media tactics. Isolate. What are we trying to achieve? And then we can start talking about what kind of messaging, where it should go, how the message should look, what we talk, how we engage with people. If we just want to get brand awareness, that's one thing. If we want to bring people into our tap room, that's another thing. If we want to make people aware that there are restaurants in the local area, then that's another thing. If we want to what are we trying to achieve? Then you start looking at how to build a solution to solve that problem.
Or the roadmap of solutions in order. That's where it gets even more,
Yeah. And by the way, that's fun. Like it's sort of like a game, right? But things become very intimidating and not fun when you don't know how to connect the problem with the whole bunch of potential solutions. You've got to identify this, you've got to articulate this problem really well first. Then you can start to design the solutions. And there could be a dozen solutions.
Well, and if there's a dozen solutions, there's 185 people trying to sell you their solution, regardless
That's right.
of solution fit. So it's the people you can go to with advice often sell you a thing. Like what? And again, this is turning more of it into sales, but it's just an interesting fit of our conversation. But like what we are doing, I think, is that we're trying to not approach it from it's a human side, really. It's not about the technology. It's agnostic of the software, all that stuff. Because at the end of the day, we need to understand the true need, and then we'll go find whatever the solution is. But where it became, what's that?
I've got a question for you. So,
Sure.
when you're talking to people about business solutions, and and I assume that it often ends up into technology, because there's
Either
often,
reduction of, movement of, or added
yeah,
of. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you've got everything
Hmm.
from email to work, like office products to
Hmm.
communications tools to, like you said, AI. Um, and then I think, because I'm a bit of a contrarian, I think that's the right word. Like, for example, I've been using Linux for a long time. Now, I'm not using it right now for work because the platform was not compatible with some of the
Yeah.
software that I had already been using. Um, but how often do you end up working with people, um, or I guess, how often is I'm not even sure how the right question, how to ask the question. Um, I'm curious about how many people are interested in just following a single recurring theme of solutions and technology.
Oh yeah, no, I think similar to what you said earlier. For us, it's all around like we have to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back to what you're actually trying to do and why.
Yeah,
And because contrarian is actually a good word because your contrarian is like non-popular, off the shelf systems. You're looking for more control and whatever reason. But then we have some people who are just anti-technology or contrarians on any number of factors. But like we need to know what you're trying to achieve and why. But then we also have to understand where you've already invested
yeah,
and what are going to be barriers to change because change management will probably be the strongest definition of what the
yeah, yeah,
process is.
yeah,
And it's not just the key owner. Like if you have a whole team of people who like we had one client who's like, I need a CRM for all the reasons that most companies should have some type of CRM, client information in one place, because there's so many reasons. A whole separate conversation. Um, but then like a traditional CRM doesn't work for a company when your sales force, the people doing sales, are all on the phone or in the door, all over the age of 60, have never used a smartphone. And it's like, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like you're not going to be able to pull a CRM off the shelf. Like the end result is you want client database and information so that when you go to sell your business or transition it, all the relationships are owned by the company and not by the individuals.
yeah,
You can forecast sales. Like
yeah,
those are the, and then it's a very fascinating conversation around how do we solve the problem. Although if you Google that problem, everybody comes up with HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever. Uh, so yeah, it's a lot of human discussion. Happy to go outside and happy to Colby and I have actually decided to have like just a solo podcast for us to talk about some of the specific how we do things because we do get some questions and it just feels like
yeah.
we like these conversations to not necessarily be about us selling ourselves. But I did have one little tangent there I wanted to go for. Double click on is, and I've lost it. I do kind of want to bring it to the health side though. If like, do
Me
you have
too.
any? So I'm going to start with the vulnerable share first, and because Colby, you are the guy who goes to the gym and does the sports, and he's a nutritionist and all those things. So it's like watching you guys, two members of a choir, geek out on your next song. But from my point of view, I've never, ever enjoyed the gym or exercise for exercise sakes. I've never enjoyed a team sport, although I like hiking and skiing and mountain biking and those things. And so I've made the decision, and it's not the first time, but so far I'm a month in, and I'm trying to treat it serious for similar reasons of like, oh, this isn't good. But my physical fitness was always a function of what I did. I was healthiest when I was a line cook, and I was pretty healthy when I worked for tourism. And when I was a business owner in a local food and organic food store, I was pretty healthy because I was on my feet all the time, and I was in the kitchen, and I was eating and promoting. Like I wouldn't allow myself to eat McDonald's because it was off-brand. Like I was always a function, and now I love what I do, but I do it mostly by sitting at a desk in long times thinking and talking to people and this kind of. And so I've had to shift, and I have. So there's two sides to this. It is coming to a question. I promise. One is I'm going from little understanding, and I don't take advice well, and I'm trying to kind of solo the journey a little bit to get to a little better because I get frustrated at the gym. And so I'm loving it. Like as you started back, or from your kinesiology, like what are any recommendations on starting it out? But second is this: I have a mental break around, and I grew up with it. I thought about this a lot over the last month. I grow up, and the idea of you having to go exercise is because you don't work hard enough. I don't know anybody in any of my extended family who would have gone to the gym or exercise, because we all worked in jobs or in lifestyles that were physical. And so I realize there's a real mental block there around, like, the idea of going to exercise is like, because I'm not a healthy lifestyle, but the whole idea of work's changed. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts, or in your research, or like any thoughts around that difference. There's a lot of questions. Throw it all at you. Spaghetti on the wall.
We could talk here for literally days. Like,
Yeah.
literally. Easily. So it all boils down to something that Warren Buffett said. Ironically, what Warren Buffett does not seem to be all that fit, and Warren Buffett also always has a bottle of Coke, when he's talking, and he eats candy. So Warren Buffett doesn't seem to be the right kind of person to give the advice I'm about to share. But he was speaking to a group of, well, this is what the meme is anyway. That he was speaking to a group of students, and and he said to them. He said, "Tell you what," and I'm paraphrasing. He said, "Tell you what, I'll buy any one of you, or all of you, a car. Any car in the whole wide world." He said, and you can have that car. He said, "But there's a catch if you take me up on this." He said, "It's the only car you'll ever get for the rest of your life." And these are kids. And so his message that he said later was that, if you're going to only have one car for the rest of your life, you're going to really take care of it. If you think about it, you're going to take really good care that you're going to give it the best oil. You're going to treat it well. You're not going to abuse it,
One would hope so, but
there's a whole bunch of things we do to abuse ourselves. Everything from eating poorly to sleeping poorly to partying too much. There's all kinds of things that we do to abuse our bodies and our minds, and they're connected. And so that is the foundation for it all for me, is that we've got this one body from the time we're born until the time we die. That's it. You can't swap out halfway through. Not today anyway. Someday in the future that might be possible, but today.
Just parts now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, parts. I studied working on a master's at the Institute of Biomedical Engineering. I studied total knee arthroplasty, knee replacements. So I'm a bit informed on that space too. But so we get this one body. So look after it, and there's a whole bunch of things you can do to look after it. There's mental, spiritual. There's diet. What goes in. You are what you're made. You are what you eat. Staying hydrated and sleeping well and eating well and exercising, moving your body. And so when I think of moving your body, so you know what? So when I was I built a small house recently, and because we bought some land down by your neck of the woods. And so I went in there and I had to clear the land first. And so I had to cut the trees down. I had to move the trees, and I had to, so there was a lot of physical work. And this was in the wintertime. And so, so I had a chainsaw, and I had an ATV with a large, I was doing really hard, heavy physical work. And you're moving trees around in the wintertime on a hillside, that's not easy. So at that time, I was getting a lot of physical activity in. Not so much aerobic, a little bit, because when you're trying to pull a tree up the side of a hill for 15 minutes, it's aerobic. But there's a lot of aspects, to if you want to optimize, then you need to look at all the parts. You need to look at all the muscles in the body, right? Because usually when you're doing certain types of physical activity, it's great that you're doing physical activity, but you're usually not doing comprehensive. It's like going into a business. Are all the parts of the business working well? Or if you're focusing on just one part of the business, like your body.
My own words against me. Look at that.
Yeah. Gonna be a word.
I guess this could be a marketing thing for you guys, but it's not. It's analogous, right? So yes, Levi, you may have been doing physical activity, but were you doing as much as you could do for all the parts?
Oh yeah, no.
And then And if you want to talk about, physical fitness, there's a whole other realm to talk about other types of mental and spiritual fitness or wellness. Then you think of, if I were to, there's different aspects of so if you, there's a whole bunch of things I want to say all at the same time, so they're all getting clogged at the bottleneck here. But there's strength and endurance and mobility are some of the most important parts of fitness, right? So, and interestingly, and I've read a lot of research on this, and not popular publications, but scientific literature. And so if you were to focus, if someone said to you, Levi, you can only work on strength or endurance or mobility, strength is probably the one that you'd want to work with because it does a whole bunch of things all at the same time. But really you want to work with all of them, and that's what I try to do today. And you think about it, if you're 90 years old, can you reach up to grab what you want on the top shelf? Do you have the mobility in your spine and your shoulder and strength? Mm-hmm. There's a guy by the name of Peter Attia, a YouTube celebrity, and he talks a lot about a lot of different things. And one of the things that he has created for himself that I thought was really interesting, he created something called the centenarian workout. And the centenarian workout is let me paint this picture. So there's a concept called sarcopenia, that you lose muscle capacity, as you age. You gain it up until sometime in your 20s, and then over time you lose it, right? So imagine the graph. You're up here at your peak, and then even if you maintain a healthy lifestyle, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose strength. We'll use strength as the Merck parameter right now, but there's also endurance and mobility. You're going to lose by the time you're 100, you're going to have lost some, right? You're not going to be the same physical specimen you are when you were 25. And so what he did, how high, and of course, not everybody in the 20s are at the same level of fitness, right? Strength, endurance, mobility. And so what he did is he said, where do I want to be when I'm 100, centenarian? He said, so when I'm 100, I want to be able to lift 35 pounds over my head, the weight of a toddler, a grandchild. I want to be able to get up off the floor. Sorry, I don't know how to get rid of it. Oh, there we go. So, no, I answered it. I have no. So his centenarian workout is he plotted where he wants to be at 100 to do all these different things: get up off the floor, lift the toddler off over his head, et cetera, et cetera. And so, knowing what the slope of the curve is, that the typical human being, male human being loses, strength and mobility over time, you can plot where you need to be over here at this end, right? Sort of like a cash flow or a growth curve or whatever, right? And so, which I thought was really fascinating. So he started to tailor his workouts to be able to make sure that he was able to do those things at 100, which is one way to look at it. But I don't know if that answered your question, but it started to
just to think about that for the majority of people, that is significantly less than people think they need to do. Like to get to that 35 pounds overhead by the time you're 100, like that.
But that might mean 135 right now. But
yeah, yeah. But it's similar to the business questions. Is like, what is the end result that we're looking for, and why? Like, what does that actually mean to you? And I've come to the recent conclusion that this is more of a psychology game than approaching it from like, oh, I need to do this workout, I need to follow this diet. Let's start with, why are we doing this? And viscerally understand it. And because long-term goals, I find, if they're not attached to a really, really good why, then it's just, it's like saving money. It's like anything. It's like, when you talk about you talk to a 30-year-old, a 20-year-old about compound interest over time, that's not very exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
So, creating some excitement around the why winning some of those short-term goals and understanding what those might look like, I think is how I've been, because I've been in the fitness world for since I was like 15, and thought about it a lot, and now I'm more thinking of it as like a psychology thing, because they're to get up and do the thing consistently. I think it's probably a good place to start. Is like, why are we doing this in the first place?
I don't know why, but until this conversation, I've never directly correlated getting fit, going to the gym, physical health to everything I know about change management. And I've just
You know
never
what?
ever connected the two until right now. And
So listen. So one of the really important things it's about change management, and so I think of change management from a behavior perspective, of like habits, right? So Cal Newport wrote a book called Tiny Habits. I think that's the name of the book.
yeah.
And so I recommend it. And so it's all about tiny habits, one little step at a time. And so like 2.5, 3 years ago, I was out of shape. I've lost 45 pounds. 45 pounds heavier with fat. My mobility was declining. I wasn't sleeping well. I was eating too much. I was drinking too much. Just everything. I mean, it was all not good. And I made a pact with myself that I was going to change. And I read the book Tiny Habits by Cal Newport, and it is true. So I started making little tiny changes. Like I would buy. I'm going to air some dirty laundry here. I would buy every Friday. I had a habit on my way home. I'd stop at the grocery store, and amongst other things, I'd get 2 bags of chips. Or actually, I'd get a bag of chips and a bag of corn chips or cheesies, one of the two. And I like the jalapeno chips, by the way. They're the best. And so anyway, I'd get these 2 bags of chips, and I'd have so many beers, and I'd have so much food. And anyway, and so what I did is I just, one of the many, many small habits I started with, I said, okay, you know what? Heck that, frig that. I'm going to, shoot. There. I said, I'm gonna stop, I'm gonna cut back. So I would only get 1 bag of chips. So look, that's not perfect, but it's 1 bag less. And the chips were, these are not the right numbers. The chips might have been, um, 500 calories a bag, and the corn chips were like 700 calories a bag. So I dropped the corn chips. Anyway, so then I started going to the gym, maybe 2 or 3 days a week. Oh my goodness. It's a different. Oops. I'm going to turn the phone right off. Sorry about that. Yeah, tiny habits. And so anyway, look, so it's change management. It's all about tiny habits, and you start to build on success. And I remember, oh my God, the first day I started going to the gym, I was standing there, and I had been quite fit, right? So I was weights that I was lifting. You think back to what you were lifting, and you want to start there, right? But no, you can't do that. So I was lifting. I was doing some curls, and I was standing there by the bench and in front of the mirror, and I was doing curls. And I started at like, Steven, start lighter than you need to, but because you're going to get hurt. And because I'm 60, I was 58 at the time. And I looked to my right, and there was a girl. She might have been 95 pounds, and she was lifting more than twice what I was lifting, doing the same thing. And it's so demoralizing, My ego took a huge hit. But I thought it's okay. We're talking about the long term here, and so I stuck with it, and I'm 3 years later, I'm in a pretty good place.
Mm.
But tiny habits, change management, tiny habits.
It's funny how this, like, I've tried every sort of workout routine and different diets, and have taken it more seriously, and to the point where I've taken it so seriously where it hurt my relationship.
Yeah.
And finding that balance, where when I was doing nutrition school, I was eating like an insane person, and only organic. I was doing juicing fast. I was doing all this stuff, and that was not a fun person to be around.
Yeah.
And kind of,
Yeah.
once again, going back to like, why am I doing this? And like, what's important to me? And working that whole health journey into that equation now, not just business goals, all that kind of stuff. It's like, it just becomes it becomes more clear, a little sooner. And even the stuff that I'm doing now, because I also work at a desk most of the time, and I'm driving a lot, sitting. And something I'm trying to do now is every hour or so, I grab a kettlebell or go do some squats, just do 10, 15, come sit back down, get the blood flow going, you think clearer. And so I'm trying to add like small things, not be so hard on myself that it has to be a perfect workout every time I go. Or do I have to go anywhere at all? How can I set up more wins more often throughout the day?
I read I watch a fair amount of podcasts like this, I guess. And yesterday I watched one by Chris Williamson. You may have heard of Chris.
Yep.
And really the whole thing was about be kind to yourself. And we're, ironically, we are among the hardest on ourselves. We have a more negative, more, difficult opinion of ourselves than anybody else. Like we're harder on ourselves than anybody, and we shouldn't be. There's no need to be.
No.
And then in this video, he was interviewing somebody who I read his a book about his writings. Really incredible guy, Naval Ravikant. Naval Ravikant is. I recommend following him. And anyway, he said that we don't spend enough time thinking about the big questions, but I think the big questions are the big questions for good reasons. It sounds kind of funny, but when people talk about the meaning of life, with these big questions, right? Well, we don't spend a whole lot of time because they're almost like thought of as cliches that are really just sayings. But they're the big questions for a reason, and they deserve the attention that they propose to have.
Yeah, it's funny, like even when it comes to things like meditation and taking that time for yourself to really like decompress in the day. And I got thinking, because I know a fair amount of smokers in my life, and I started to think about smoking a little bit differently. When they go out for a smoke break, that is time that I wouldn't necessarily have taken to go. You don't even realize, maybe you're looking at the trees, maybe you're looking at the sky, maybe you're whatever. But like that 10 minutes that you're out there, like, I wonder, because your body doesn't, when you stop eating chips, your body doesn't reward you. It's just that you're not adding more damage to like the thing that you're doing. And I started thinking about things like, those bad habits, like the drinking and smoking. But like, what are the benefits of doing those things?
What are the benefits of my bad habits? I'll just write the book.
Well, it's true though. Like, if you're all of a sudden not social, going out on the weekends, and you're not laughing with that same group of friends, what's the health toll on that? What's the health toll of the stress of needing to hit a perfect diet? And it's just some weird rabbit holes to be able to go down when you're thinking about this stuff. But like, I think that's where like, balance and following a few easy pillars consistently is a bit of a.
No, you hit a really good. These are all really important thoughts, and the same thing applies to fitness, right? You can go overboard in fitness and diets, and so everything in some it's an overused saying, but everything in moderation. It's somewhat true. However, I'll say this: one of the things that people in North America have a tendency to say, they talk about average. They talk about average health, And if you're comparing yourself to the average health of a typical North American male or female, that's not a good standard, right? So,
Yeah.
if you talk about eating well and exercising well and treating your body well, um, yeah, I agree with you 100% that you can overdo it. Very, very, very few people overdo it.
Yeah.
Now, what does happen though, and I think you're really important to acknowledge, is that there's a pendulum. And we have a tendency to do not enough and too much, not enough and too much. And very rarely do we find that optimal point. But it's it takes some effort to push yourself hard enough to get up out of bed and go for that walk at 5:30 or 6 or whatever it is that you're going to do in life. It takes effort. You gotta. It's work.
Yeah.
That's life.
That's life.
We're gonna be dead.
That's life.
We're gonna be dead for all of eternity. Well, so that's a really interesting thought. But so this book that I'm reading currently, called Irreducible by Federico Faggin, he's a Italian physicist, and he's the founder of the microchip for Intel, the microchip, the 4004. And anyway, brilliant physicist. And he's been doing a lot of work in quantum mechanics lately. And so in quantum mechanics, there's all kinds of really weird shit that's happening in quantum mechanics, by the way. And some of the most incredible minds in the world, like Feynman, what's his name? Richard Feynman? Some of the brightest physicists on the planet, are confused by quantum studies, quantum physics, quantum mechanics. Anyway, so he talks about, so if you've ever thought this, sorry, this is going to sound way too philosophical, way too out there, woo woo, but
We did Buddhism in our last episode, and it was
Really?
fantastic.
Okay.
We
Well,
went deep.
I would think of myself as a Buddhist if I'm anything. So anyway, so he talks about, so I've always thought of myself as an atheist, or at a minimum an agnostic, because I can't prove that there's no God. I can't prove it, although I believe that there's no God. In the concept that man has created in the dogmatic structures that we've created, right?
Yeah.
So when and then I've had conversations like I just said. I said, well, you're going to be dead. You're going to be live life now, because you're going to be dead forever, for all of eternity, for trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of years. And then for the first time in my life, I think that maybe that's not true. So Federico Faggin, in this book, so you can see him on YouTube, phenomenal interviews that he's had. So one of the reasons why I thought we were dead forever is because it was like a reducible type of concept. Because I believe that consciousness arose in the mind. We've got this meat package that has all this electrical signals going on in it. We've got these neurons and connections in the brain, and that this is the mechanism that's in here that creates consciousness. And then when all these electrochemical signals stop and disintegrate, then it's gone. But he produces some pretty interesting evidence to suggest that that is not the case. That we are quantum. We have a classical quantum, which is the physical structure, the physical universe. But there's also the quantum, the irreducible quantum of the human mind, that it existed before our bodies did and will exist after, and that everything has consciousness. Now this sounds really woo, I know, but everything has consciousness. Your dog has consciousness. The ant has consciousness. The tree has consciousness. Everything has consciousness, but it sees the world through different filters, and our brain is a filter. So I now am at least uncertain as to whether or not when my body dies, will I be gone forever? I'm uncertain. I'm only a third of the way through the book, so.
One of the things I love about having a platform or a reason to have these types of conversations is because I never come away with less curiosity. I get questions answered. I ask questions. but I only leave every conversation with more things I want to know more about.
Yeah.
I just like the purpose of an interview is not to solve anything or like check done. Yeah, very, very fascinating.
This is something that I've not specifically what you're, well, in the same vein of what you're speaking about. It's something that I've struggled with since about 16 years old. And not any closer to solving it. The most recent conclusion is that with all the religions and different perspectives, I feel like we just got it wrong as a human race. And yes, maybe most likely there's something else, but we just didn't quite get it right.
Well, your brain has so much capability, right? Your brain has evolved to a certain level. Um, a dog's brain, so a dog's brain is what it is. An ant's brain is what it is, and we perceive the world through our brains, through the ability for it to process information and make sense of the world around us. Our brains, our human brains, do not have anywhere near the capability to understand the world in the universe as it exists today. We are so in the dark. We're as much in the dark as the ant is about this conversation today.
Yeah.
Like, we're that far away from understanding reality, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
It's 1D. I don't know how many degrees away from reality that we can understand, but we're nowhere near, I don't think, where we need to be.
And that, Stephen, that's I think that's where some of my, and this is some work that I need to do on this, but like that's where a lot of my deep frustration with religion comes from, is the sheer confidence in the way that they speak. It about answers to very complex things. If there wasn't that level of confidence, I would be more interested in exploring more ideas around different religions. And that's the thing that really turned me off, is like, how are you standing there saying this with such confidence? I don't understand where it comes from. And I'm like I wish I could just crawl into your brain for a second and see
Nice
where
to
that
know where
comes
the
from.
evidence is. So Ricky, I watched an interview with Ricky Gervais and Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's great.
and he says and Stephen Colbert is if people realize, is actually quite religious.
Yes.
Ricky Gervais is a known atheist to the extreme, and he made a really interesting comment to Stephen Colbert. He said, "Well, look," he said, "You're an atheist like I am, in most situations." He said, "There are over 3,000 religions in the world." And he said, "You only believe in one of them. So you don't believe in 2,999. So you only don't believe in one more than me."
I saw that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that amazing? So,
Yes.
and then, so, yeah. So
Yeah.
there you go. So,
Fascinating. Yeah. What a world.
Yeah. We hit these. This is like the fifth time we hit these points in a conversation where I'm like, all right, so like all the other things I was going to mention on my list are like going to take us from deep and philosophical to shallow and transactional. It's
Comment on that. This is the reason I will continue to not write questions down prior to doing these interviews, is because like it always goes this way, and this is why I love it.
I like to be prepared. I'll always make notes, but I was like, it's fascinating.
yeah.
Is there anything in your world you want to talk about or share or ask us that we haven't explored, Stephen? We kind of scratched our own itches. I feel like it's a very selfish process.
I'm interested in so many things. Like there's almost nothing that I'm not interested in. When I came back from out west, so Don and I moved out west after I graduated, and out there, I managed Canada's first national altitude training center. It's a training center for elite athletes. Miriam Bedard, prior to her 2 gold in Lillehammer, trained with us. Her whole team went over there. weeks in ahead, and she stayed with us, and she got 2 gold. Just obviously, it's because of me.
She was my pen pal in grade school.
Really
Small.
cool. And when I came back, we came back because my first daughter was born, and we realized we thought we were going to live in BC forever. Like that we thought the Okanagan Valley was beautiful, lifestyle was amazing. But as soon as we had our first child, both of our families are from here, and we realized we wanted to bring her up close to family. So we packed up and moved home. I didn't have a job. I ended up getting a interim job managing the town of Nakwick's recreation department. And why am I even saying this? I've lost my
Interested in
stuff.
lots of things. That's where you started.
Oh, and I remember when I was there, I said, well, look, I'm not from Nakwick. I mean, I know a few people because I live close, but I'm not from Nakwick. And I thought, how am I going to get to know the community? Because I'm the Recreation and Parks Director, and community is what I'm here to serve. And so right across, so my office was in the arena, and on the other side of the parking lot was the town community center, I guess. And every, I don't remember what day, but let's say it was every afternoon, the women, most of them were older women, would get together and they would have a quilting bee. And so I went, you want to talk about interesting. I went over, so I decided I'm going to go over and introduce myself. And I did. And they said, well, have a seat. And I sat down, and they said, well, here, make yourself useful. And they gave me a needle and thread. And so I started quilting. And so here I am. I wrote this big quilt. And, I don't know, how old was I then? This was back in 1994 and 95, 96, something like that. And so I'm there and I'm quilting, and my God, do you learn a lot, sitting around a quilt with, a whole bunch of older ladies in the community. So if you ever want to learn about a community and who's who and who's what and where things, oh my God, that's where you go. So so what that taught me, in addition to how to learn more about the community, and then of course, because I went there, and they're like the communication hub, right? So everybody knew about me like that afternoon or that evening. But what I learned was that there's always open yourself up to different perspectives. Like talk to people that you don't agree with, and like really listen. Like really work at listening and trying to understand. Because if I hadn't gone and talked to those ladies, my life would be different today, honestly. So yeah, I think there's so much, and this I'm sure for you guys is part of that, right? Is talking to different people, because just talking to different people and letting it go freeform, like where this has been pretty much today, is important. Because one of my favorite words. Donald Trump loves the word tariff, so Stephen Dixon loves the word serendipity. I just love serendipity. The serendipitous thing. Like most of my life has been serendipitous. I mean, and here's what serendipity is to entrepreneurialism and success. So serendipity and success and entrepreneurialism are connected in that a good entrepreneur who is aware, looking for ideas and understands, business and markets and demand and opportunity. And exploiting, that's not a bad word. This serendipity is that when something comes into your life, recognizing that it's an opportunity is the challenge. It's being able to pick up on those things and seeing it as an opportunity when nobody else does, and grabbing onto it right away. And so that's a big part of entrepreneurialism, in my view. Is understanding how to identify opportunities that serendipity drops in your lap. You probably have an opportunity drop on your lap at a minimum once a week.
Yeah.
At a minimum. Maybe every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the momentum around serendipity, right? It's like you can create momentum around that kind of stuff if you're looking at life similar to a golden retriever, where every interaction is something positive or could be something positive.
I get is that a backhanded way to call me a dog? I mean,
You know
No,
what?
he is self-describing.
I'm self-describing. I often refer to myself as the attitude of a golden retriever, where it's just like, oh, well, I could look at it differently. Like there's an opportunity everywhere, and
yeah. I'm more of a terrier. I think. I'm more
yeah,
of a terrier.
that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, we live our lives like our strategic plans. We're having them more frequently now because we were annual, and it's like there's this fine tensions. Probably they're not a line. It's the tension between new and exciting and get far enough into what we had said we were going to do, and like it's just the tension between is where we've seen success, but it needs. Like I'm not interested in ever owning a business on my own again because I don't trust myself to not have that tension within my own multiple personalities. So it's been very effective for us
to recognize. And by the, you know what, I believe that in moving forward, if some of my new ventures, pan out the way I'd like them to, I'm similar to you, Levi, is that I would like to have somebody else working with me as a partner because I think that there's so much joy in sharing the excitement, sharing the ideation, and sharing the success. There's nothing more lonely than being the CEO of a company without a partner.
Yeah.
And I believe I belong to a business organization of CEOs and entrepreneurs, and we have a cohort, and that is probably the single biggest value of this group is that it's lonely when you're at the head of a company. Nobody really wants to communicate with you the way that you want to communicate, right?
Yeah.
And because nobody's going to say the wrong thing to you, right? They're going to be guarded always. So having a partner that says, "Smart the fuck up," what were you thinking? Having somebody that can speak freely and openly and get excited with you is really, I think, fun.
Yeah.
So I'm completely.
Another side effect of these conversations is typically we create those moments even inside of our peer groups.
And one fun new metric that I've been really excited about, because we've gone through some tough times, is our ability to go through tough times together, and we've kind of seen the worst. And I would say not the worst situations, but like in each other, like we know.
Yeah. That's
you know what I'm saying? Like it's. I'm more excited about knowing that we can go through hard things.
Yeah.
Wow, I kind of feel like we're coming to an organic endpoint. I just these are I'm going to create the checklist of meaningful topics we talked on. You actually mentioned Trump's. We got politics in there. We got religion. We got philosophy. We got business. We got.
In the next episode, we'll explore consciousness of Layla. That's
so. Is Layla a golden doodle or what?
She's a sleepy cockapoo at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. But we'll.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Figure out what's going on in her brain.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. I've managed to have this conversation a little bit differently in a couple different times, and we don't spend enough time together, but I love that we were able to have this today. I also love that I was able to bring you two together because it's really funny how much you have in common we talk a lot about how complementary skill sets but aligned values and those kindred spirits out there that you can have meaningful conversation around. So at the very least, my good deed for the day is done.
We can go to the gym and do a workout.
And I'll be on the other side of the gym, doing my own thing. Yeah. All right.
We'll make it happen.
Good.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We'll stick around for a sec, but we'll call this episode an end.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
This episode of Built to Last is brought to you by Ironhouse Pro, your behind-the-scenes partner in building organizations designed to thrive. We specialize in solving the big challenges, the small annoyances, and everything in between. So while you're out there dreaming big, we're here making sure your systems, processes, and people are ready for tomorrow. Ironhouse Pro, driven to create lasting organizations. Learn more at ironhousepro.com.